Origin of the species, just do them all. Go click, click, click. Origin of the Species, 1859, and Descent of Man, 1871. There was Darwin's two main books. And we're going to focus mainly on the second one, where he talks about human evolution. The first one's mainly about evolution in general and animal evolution, but man is an animal in the first book, and is included. But Descent of Man is his book specifically to prove that men descended from apes and monkeys. That was the main purpose he wrote it. And of course, all of that happened without any intelligent designer. It all happened by accident. Next slide. So what is the theory of evolution? Next slide. We probably know this to some degree. Just go boom, boom, boom. All life on Earth descended from one cell. I just said that. Probably in a prehistoric swamp. Number two, small mutations of that cell. It was a smelly swamp too. Over billions of years. You have to have billions of years to do this. So the little cell develops into something else and something else, and then there's a little mutation, and then you got 4 cells, and one little cell develops a mutation that makes it stronger than the other 3 cells, so it survives and the other 3 cells die. Survival of the fittest, right? So this is his whole process, that these little mutations, some are advantageous, some are not, and the advantageous mutations develop into what we have today on Earth, all these people. So natural selection allows the organisms with the better mutations to survive more than the weaker ones with the worse mutations, thus weeding out the weak ones. Remember that phrase, weeding out the weak ones. So humans are just animals. This is what Descent of Man says, and that they've evolved in the same way as all the other organisms from monkeys and apes. Next slide. So here's where it gets really very pointed. I want to say publicly that Darwin has a very evil legacy. That few ideas, just keep it rolling, in terms of atheism, eugenics, racism, and white supremacy. I don't know of any other idea from the scientific community that has damaged the human race more than the ideas of Darwin. Let that sink in for a moment. Darwin's ideas, I believe, after lots of research and years of thinking about this, have damaged the human race more than any other idea that's ever come out of the scientific community. His ideas are one of the main foundations for atheism, eugenics, racism, and white supremacy. If there is white supremacy in America, Darwin is the main guy who's responsible for that. Okay? Well, hang on. Here we go. Next slide. So let's talk about atheism. So the Pew Research Company in 2016 did a research asking why are young adults leaving the church? Thank you, Kevin Coyle, for sending me this. The 4 top reasons that these young adults gave, in their own words, are learning about evolution when I was away in college. That was the first reason. Learning about evolution when I was in college. Our kids are at risk going to college and sitting in a biology class and having somebody with a lot of degrees tell them, well, you stupid thing, you believe in some divine being, but actually science has proven that none of that is true because of all these other scientists say so. Something like that. Richard Dawkins, who's one of the main proponents of Darwinism. Richard Dawkins, anybody know that name? Okay, he's very well known in that community. He himself said that he gave up God once he started to study the theory of evolution. So the second reason is religion is opiate of the people. That's Karl Marx, of course. Wonder where they heard that. A rational thought makes religion go out the window. In other words, what the professor said makes more sense than what the pastor said. And lastly, lack of any scientific or specific evidence of a creator. You could probably go to church your whole life and never hear these sermons that I'm about to give you about intelligent design, because churches don't talk about the scientific evidence that undergirds or validates what we believe as Christians. So why not? Why ignore that? Why did our kids go to high school and college and be blasted with 27 scientific reasons why the Bible is not true? Why don't we prepare them and protect them? Next slide. This is the quote. Hit the next one. from Dr. Watson, a noted evolutionary biologist and science writer, in the magazine Nature, 1929. Listen, evolution is a theory universally accepted, not because it can be proven by logical, coherent evidence, to be true, but because the only alternative, special creation, is clearly incredible. So they have decided, these scientists, a priori, beforehand, before they really examine it, they're not looking at evidence with a neutral mind, okay, with an open mind. They've already decided whatever we come up with here as an explanation, it cannot include anything supernatural, okay? And to prove that, next slide, Darwin himself was determined to promote science, promote atheism through science. Are we there? Yeah. Darwin said that atheism is best promoted by the gradual illumination of men's minds which follow from the advance of science. How about that? What a great guy. That he thinks that you can best promote atheism by studying the advances of science, especially his, of course. Next slide. So, do you know that most scientists are atheists? Does that come to any surprise to anybody? So the Pew Research in 2009 did a survey, religious beliefs among general public and the scientists, and not surprisingly, 83% of the public believe that there is a God. 83% of Americans, okay? Scientists, on the other hand, only 33%. A full 59% could not answer the statement, I believe in God. 59, almost 60% could not answer the statement. Either they didn't believe or they believe in a universal spirit, higher power, but they didn't believe in God. That's a lot. And these are the guys who are running the colleges, the universities, the science academic associations in the United States. Let's go to Dawkins. This is the man I mentioned earlier who used to believe in God, but after studying Darwin decided not to. It is absolutely safe to say that if you meet someone who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked, but I'd rather not consider that. He says this publicly. He basically has mocked every religious person in the world who believes that their God, whoever that God is, made the world, including our God. He has mocked us. In fact, he has a new book out called The God Delusion. So he's gone not just from defending Darwin, but to attacking religion, attacking theism. And that's where it's at today. It's really two worldviews. So next one, Darwin and eugenics. Anybody know what eugenics is? Not very many. Okay. Well, all right. So it's sometimes called social Darwinism. Herbert Spencer, who was a contemporary of Darwin, took Darwin's theories of the concept of the survival of the fittest. You know, the little cell with the best mutation is the one that's going to survive. The little creature with the best mutation, and all the others, the weaker ones die off. And he decided that since there are stronger members of the human society and there are weaker members of the human society, some that are more advanced and some that are less advanced, and we should not help the less advanced. We should not help the poor or uneducated classes of people because it's just natural selection. We're just going to help natural selection. So, you know, they're the weaker ones. They're going to, we don't want to promote them. They're the weaker ones. So that was the beginning. And then, so eugenics was enforced by forced sterilization and preventing marriage. Basically, to keep people from reproducing. Eugenics was started officially by Francis Galton, who happened to be a cousin of Darwin's, a contemporary and a cousin of Darwin's. It became very popular, eugenics did, in the United States and Europe in the 20s and 30s. Next slide. Some of this is going to shock you. Go ahead. From 1909 to 1979, 20,000 sterilizations occurred in California state mental institutions. Till 1979, 20,000 sterilizations. 33 states and Puerto Rico allowed involuntary sterilization. Involuntary. They just drag you into the room, boom, 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 without your consent. 20 to 50% of Native Americans were sterilized between 1970 and 76 in the United States of America. 70,000 people total had forced sterilizations during those years. 70,000 people. because they're the weaker members of society, they're mentally or physically handicapped or challenged or whatever, and so we don't want them reproducing, so we're going to sterilize you. And okay, let me just say this. All these ideas I'm going to say about what Darwin's theory supports existed before Darwin. There was always people who were looking down on other people. I would venture to say that ever since Cain killed Abel, one group of people has looked down on another group of people in every continent and every civilization. One tribe against tribe, one nation against, and it's always been there. But it was just like, well, that's your idea. That's just what you think. But Darwin did something unique in the history of humanity. He was able to convince enough people that there was scientific evidence to undergird or validate his ideas on atheism, eugenics, race, and white supremacy. Those four things. He said, I can prove it to you scientifically that these things are true. And that's what makes those ideas some of the most dangerous ideas that have ever been come into the world. So hang on to that thought. All right, let's talk about Margaret Sanger, eugenicist. She was one of the greatest promoters of eugenics in the United States. Quote, the gradual suppression, elimination, and eventual extinction of defective stocks, speaking of human beings, those human weeds which threaten the blooming of the finest flowers of American civilization. Well, she was talking about poor, uneducated, non-white people. Okay? And look, here's another quote from her book, Woman and the New Race. The most merciful thing that a large family does, she didn't think large families were a good idea, to one of its infant members is to kill it. You know, don't have too many kids. Well, no wonder she founded Planned Parenthood. Next slide. So she was deeply influenced by Charles Darwin. That's a fact. Margaret Sanger loved Charles Darwin. She's the founder of Planned Parenthood, which it does some good things for women, but it also is one of the primary facilities for the killing of millions of infants in the womb in the United States. She was a leader in birth control, okay, and the free love movement. She was married twice, and she kept cheating on her husband, because she believed in free love. She maintained that the brains of Australian Aborigines were only one step evolved from chimpanzees and just under blacks, Jews, and Italians. But she was not prejudiced. Her magazine argued for state-sponsored sterilization programs, forcibly sterilizing the less capable. You like that idea? No. But it's coming out of Darwin. Because now, if Darwin hadn't made it scientifically valid, these ideas would not have had that strength. But because science bought into it, now it's the gold standard, right? It's science. So here's some of the posters of that day in the 20s and 30s. Selective sterilization protects children. No child should be born to subnormal parents. Denied a fair and healthy start in life, or doomed from birth to a mental institution. Can you imagine seeing this on the wall in school or something? And there's a couple of others there. There was even a Supreme Court case, Buck versus Bell, that upheld the state's right to forcibly sterilize people that they thought were incompetent. Whew. Next slide. She once spoke at a KKK rally, and her comment was, always to me, any aroused group was a good group, after speaking to the KKK. Wow. So next slide. She had a special project called the Negro Project. And it basically was to get lots of birth control pills into the African American neighborhoods. And of course, this was, some people suspected she had other motives. And given her overall view of humanity, I tend to agree with them. But she said this: the most successful educational approach to the blacks is through a religious appeal. We do not want word to get out that we want to exterminate the black population. And the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to their more rebellious members. Wow. Now, she isn't saying I want to exterminate them, but he says if people think that, we'll get their clergymen to try to calm them and say, oh, no, we're not trying to do that. Well, she didn't convince Ben Carson, next slide, Ben Carson, one of my heroes, hope he's one of your heroes, gifted surgeon. Yeah, he said Sanger was not particularly enamored with black people. Ha ha ha. And then one of the reasons that you find that most of their Planned Parenthood clinics in black neighborhoods is so that they can find a way to control that population. And that is true, folks. Most of the Planned Parenthood clinics are near African American neighborhoods. What a coincidence. Next, gets worse. Margaret Sanger and Hitler, in a 1933 edition of her magazine, Birth Control Review, it published a shocking argument entitled Eugenic Sterilization and Urgent Need, written by Margaret's close friend and advisor, Ernst Rudin, who was then serving as Hitler's director of genetic sterilization. So, and later, in June of that year, 33, the same magazine published an article praising the Third Reich's pre-Holocaust race purification programs, where they forcibly sterilized and then, of course, later on actually killed many of their own Germans because they were less than perfect Aryans. Next slide. So eugenics in Europe. Eugenics was big in Europe. Hitler connected his theory of a superior Aryan race to American eugenics in his book, 1934 book, very famous book, Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle. Hitler eventually killed 250,000, not just sterilized, but he killed 250,000 Germans, white Germans, because they were mentally or physically handicapped. They were useless eaters. Dr. Joseph Mengele at Auschwitz did horrific experiments on people to try to improve the Aryan race. And then, of course, Hitler killed 6 million inferior Jews as part of his cleansing of the bloodline of humanity. That's his whole deal. Whew. This is hard. Are you having a hard time digesting this? This is hard. You're not. Okay. It was hard for me to read this all the last couple of weeks, and then to say it. It's so ugly. It's so hideous. It's so repulsive but I have to say it because we need to do something about this. All right. Next slide. So The Descent of Man, 1871. Charles Darwin's book, where he says there's no fundamental difference between man and the higher animals in their mental faculties. Isn't that great? You and a chimpanzee, or what's a higher elephant maybe, or no real difference in your mental faculties. Isn't that great to know? You evolved from apes and continued evolving as various races, with some races more developed, quote unquote white, and other races less developed, quote unquote non-white. Honestly, that's how it breaks down. The white race was more advanced than the lower organisms such as pygmies and the many non-white humans. These are words he used: savage, low, and degraded. I'm going to prove that in a moment out of his book. Darwin and Racism, thank you. So Stephen Jay Gould, famous Harvard evolutionist, he's a follower of Darwin, said biological arguments for racism were common before 1859. But they increased by orders of magnitude following the acceptance of the evolutionary theory, which is what I was saying. These ideas have been around for thousands of years. My group's better than your group, you're inferior, I'm superior. But nobody was able to give it scientific weight until Darwin came along. That's the problem. That is the crux of the problem. And I've already said, if systemic racism is in the United States, it's because of Darwin. Okay, next. Next is a quote from Augustine Fuentes, an evolutionary scientist who is the head of the primatology department at Princeton and was the chair of the Department of Anthropology at the University of Notre Dame. So he's way up there. And he's writing in the magazine Science magazine, this past May 2021. And that is the most prestigious, one of the most prestigious Darwinistic evolutionary magazines in the United States, Science. And he says this: racist, sexist, and white supremacists, some of them academics, use concepts and statements validated by their presence in descent of man, as support for their erroneous beliefs, and the public accepts much of it uncritically. And he's talking about us, folks, that we just sit back and say, oh yeah, you can tell that to our students. Oh yeah, you can use that to, in your policies. and it doesn't really matter. We're going to heaven, so what? Well, that's got to stop. I mean, if we love our neighbor, there are a lot of people who don't know Jesus, aren't going to heaven. But if we love our neighbor, we shouldn't let them be abused by these racist and white supremacist views of Darwin. They should be challenged. Next. So Fuentes goes on to say, Darwin portrayed, thank you. Darwin portrayed indigenous peoples of the Americas and Australia as less than Europeans in capacity and behavior. People of the African continent were consistently referred to as cognitively depauperate, which means imperfectly developed, less capable, and of a lower rank than other races. He offered justification of empire and colonialism and genocide through survival of the fittest. In Descent, Darwin identified women as less capable than white men, often akin to lower races. How's that, ladies? So this guy's, this evolutionary scientist is saying that's what Darwin taught. That's what Darwin believed, and that's in the Descent of Man book. Darwin, in his book, in Descent of Man, uses the word savage 180 times to describe non-white, non-Europeans, 14 times in Origin of the Species. He stresses the vast differences in morals and intellect between the highest men of the highest races and the lowest savages. Of course, highest are white, savages are non-white. Next slide. When he was on his first voyage on the Beagle, a ship called the Beagle, he visited the Indians of Tierra del Fuego, which is at the very tip of South America, and he wrote, I could not have believed how wide was the difference between savage and civilized man. It is greater than between a wild and domesticated animal. Viewing such man, one can hardly make oneself believe that they are fellow creatures and inhabitants of the same world. So he was way out there. So next, I have to speed up. I know I'm running late. So all of this ended up in the public school system because the scientific community bought it. By and large, in Europe and America, the scientific community says yes and amen to Darwin. So for generations, American public school children learned that from their Darwinian biology textbooks that Caucasians were more advanced on the evolutionary ladder than Africans. Can you believe? It's in public school textbooks. Now here's a textbook from 1914. It's called A Civic Biology. This is a picture of it. And it says, at the present time there exist 5 races of man, blah, blah, blah. The Ethiopian or Negro type, originating Africa, blah, blah, blah. But down here, the last sentence, and finally, the highest of all, the Caucasians, represented by the civilized inhabitants of Europe and America. Are you shocked? Are you angry that American educators would put that in textbooks of our land, where all men are created equal and endowed with their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? It's just, I never had ever heard that. Quote, all right, let's go. Last section. Hitler loved Darwin. Next section. So Darwin's scientific support was used for Hitler's racial cleansing policies and to include getting rid of the Jews. That's the short version. Go to the next slide. In Mein Kampf, the word Entwicklung is the German word that is often translated development, but in 4 translations of the Mein Kampf, it's translated evolution, where Hitler talks about evolution. And and here's a couple of quotes. The Aryan or Germanic race is the genius race. All others, especially Jews, are parasites and lower races. In every mingling of Aryan blood, German blood, with that of lower people, colored people, the result was the end of cultured people, e.g. lower colored people. And the next slide just basically says that kind of thinking was all throughout the curriculum of all of their schools, and then all of these stuff given to the German army and the police, all of that, the teaching was embedded into that. And I have a document published by Johns Hopkins University with citations from specific German publications to verify that. Believe me, I've done my homework. All right. That's the end of what I think was one of the most difficult sermons to hear that I've been around a long time. But I'd like to end on a more positive note. And we can talk afterwards if you'd like to chat, but I know it's getting late. But I want to end with a short video from Michael Jr. Anybody know about Michael Jr.? He's an African-American. You don't know Michael Jr.? Oh my gosh, you're going to love this guy. He's an African-American Christian comedian. He was in the War Room, yeah. But he also was a very wise man, not just funny, but he's wise. And he says some things here that I'm going to use to kind of wrap up our message. So let's roll that video.
How do I know? A lot of people, when they think of the phrase, how do I know, they always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? The question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know, like for instance, people know that I do comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. So I can do comedy, I can write books, I can be in a movie, because all of it is motivated by my why. In fact, I have a new web series out called Michael Jr. Break Time. We probably just did the 6th episode. It's on YouTube. So every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time. What it is it's me. I travel around the country and I do stand-up comedy, in case you didn't know. And in the middle of my comedy set sometime, I'll stop and just talk to my audience. And we've been filming this, and it's pretty cool. So we're in Winston-Salem. I'm going to show you a clip from Winston-Salem. And I'm just talking to this guy in the audience, and he tells me that he's a musical instructor at a school. So I was like, all right, you're a musical instructor. Can you sing? Let me hear you sing a song. So this is what happened at the last episode of Michael Jr.'s Break Time. Check it. So you're a musical director? Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing, you know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I was lost, but now, right now I'm found, was blind, but now I see.
Okay, here's what I want you to catch. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you're walking towards or in your purpose.
Yeah. So in closing, that was powerful, wasn't it? Yeah. Very, very powerful. I wonder what Darwin would have said of that. Anyhow, I believe that the world needs to know the who so that they can know their why, and then their what, whatever their life turns out to be, will be much more impactful no matter who they are, where they live, what color they are, what nationality they are. But the world has been convinced by false evidence that there is no who. There's only a what. There's only that slime in that prehistoric swamp that somehow burped, and everything else that exists today came out of it over billions of years. It takes more faith to believe that than it does God, I think. But nevertheless, we need to help, we need to challenge the assumption, the presumption, and the false and evil ideas that there is no who. There's no intelligent designer who made everything and made it good. And I hope that after the end of these next couple of sermons, or somewhere in between, we can come up with some sort of a plan to do something about this. I know that's a radical thought. You actually have to do something as a result of a sermon. But I really think it's that important that we need to shift gears and say, we just can't file this in our memory and go on with life, but we actually have to do something. We have to write a letter. We have to call somebody. We have to go to a school board meeting. We have to talk to our congressman. We have to do something. We just can't have this information and let people go on suffering and being told that they're just a what because there's no who. I don't think that's responsible. I don't think it's even moral. So I want you to think about that, pray about that in days to come. Thank you for enduring what had to be a difficult message for a lot of us. And I pray that, I just pray you'll have a great day, knowing that there's a who loves you and has always loved you and always will love you. There's a who has always loved you, loves you now and will always love you. And if nothing else goes right in life, that'll never change. Amen and amen. God bless you. And let's go enjoy lunch. All right. Thank you.